Okay, my friends, welcome back. Gather around your radios or televisions or however you may be getting our program or your YouTube stream and or your Sirius satellite, whatever it may be. Gather around and listen, and I will tell you the true history of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment began with the idea that Thomas Jefferson had in 1787 when he wrote back to his mentee, to Thomas Jefferson was James Madison's mentor. I don't know what James Madison's role would be called in that. Protege. Thank you. Perfect, Shane. To his protege. And Madison had sent him a copy of the Constitution, and Jefferson said, well, this is all well and good, but I want a Bill of Rights attached to this, and I am going to lobby the Virginia delegation not to ratify this Constitution if a Bill of Rights is not attached to it. And that Bill of Rights should include a ban on monopolies in commerce, and I went through this yesterday, all this stuff, and a ban on standing armies. And so the ban on standing armies was where the Second Amendment started. And the idea was that there would be no federal army unless we were at war, and that instead every local region, every county, every township, every local region, and then ultimately under the control of the state, would have a local militia, and every male, able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 47 would be a member of that militia, and that if we were invaded, the militia would be called out. This is how it is to this day in Switzerland. It's worked very well for them for hundreds of years. And this is what Jefferson was proposing. So that was the beginning. That was the original genesis. And if you look at the various drafts of the Second Amendment, it's very clear that that's what they were talking about. There were 20 people who stood up and spoke at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 about what would ultimately become the Second Amendment, because it ultimately wasn't written into the Constitution itself. Not one of them discussed hunting, self-defense, or sport shooting. Every single one of those 20 people discussed the military, weapons in the military, and how do we best provide to not have a standing army during time of peace, because standing armies during times of peace, as Jefferson said, are the chief agents of mischief against republics. In other words, they're likely to overthrow a republic. So that's where it began. Then Madison and his buddies put together the Constitution. And in the Constitution, there was this one very problematic part. Article 1, Section 8. In Article 1, Section 8 says, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay for the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Okay. And then it says that Congress shall also have the power to, and then that's sentence 1. Sentence 12 is to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money for that use should be longer than 2 years. Now, down in the South, in the North, you had all these local militias. In the South, the militias were called slave patrols. Sally Hayden wrote a book about this called Slave Patrols, Law and Violence in Virginia and the Carolinas. And she writes, although eligibility for the militia seemed all-encompassing, not every middle-aged white male Virginian or Carolinian became a slave patroller. There were exceptions, so men in critical professions like judges and legislators could stay at work. Carl Bogus, the professor at the University of California, wrote in the UC Law Review in 1998, quote, the Georgia statutes, this is the laws of the state of Georgia, required patrols, slave patrols, under the direction of commissioned militia officers to examine every plantation each month and authorize them to search, quote, all, this is from the law of Georgia, to, quote, search all Negro houses for offensive weapons and ammunition and to apprehend and give 20 lashes to any slave found outside plantation grounds, end quote. This is the law. There were a whole series of laws passed between 1755 and 1757. This is a generation before the Revolution, that required all plantation owners or their male white employees to be members of the Georgia militia. So they were slave patrols. You know, Carl Bogus points out, basically the only way you can, in an area where the majority of the people are slaves, which was the case in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. The only way you can enforce slavery if you are white and in the minority is to have a police state. And that's what the militia was. There was the police of the police state. So here's the problem. They write this Constitution, and the Constitution gives the power to the federal government to raise an army. During the Revolutionary War, famously, Lord Dunsmore, who was a British general, had said, any slave who can escape, you can fight on our side and we'll make you a British citizen. And he actually had an entire regiment, and they all had liberty to slaves stitched onto their the flaps on their shirt pockets. Black men fighting on behalf of the British. Similarly, British General Henry Clinton did the same thing in 1779. And George Washington had several battalions, or whatever you call them, groups of freed slaves or free black men who were fighting in the American Revolution on behalf of our side. So the ratifying convention in Virginia has to decide whether or not to ratify the Constitution. And if they don't, it's going to break it. The Constitution is not going to pass. If they do ratify it, it will pass. The northern states have already passed it. The southern states are leaning toward passing it. Everybody's looking at Virginia. Virginia is the biggest state. It's right in the middle of the country. Without Virginia, you got no United States. And Patrick Henry lays it out. Patrick Henry, the largest slaveholder in the state of Virginia. He says, let me here call your attention to Article 1, Section 8 of this proposed Constitution, which gives Congress the power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. By this, sir, you see that their control, and by their, he's talking about the federal government, which includes the northern free slave states, no slave states. You see that their control over our last and best defense is unlimited, the slave patrols. If they neglect or refuse to discipline or arm our militia, then our militia will become useless. The states can do neither. This power to arm a militia remains exclusively given to the Congress by this Constitution. The power of appointing officers over men not disciplined or armed is ridiculous, so that this pretended little remains of power left to the states may at the pleasure of Congress be rendered nugatory or annulled. In other words, they can disarm our slave patrols. George Mason, who held over 200 slaves, said the same thing. He said, under various pretenses, speaking at the Virginia Ratification Convention, under various pretenses, Congress may neglect to provide for arming and disciplining our militia, the slave patrol militia, and the state governments cannot do it, for Congress has the exclusive right to arm them under this proposed Constitution. I'll finish the story after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're going to be amazed what Patrick Henry, the guy who said, give me liberty or give me death, and was the largest slaveholder in the state of Virginia, what he had to say next. Okay, so back to Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry, this is, again, the Virginia planters, all slaveholders, are sitting around trying to decide whether or not to ratify the Constitution. And they're basically saying to James Madison, we won't do this unless you amend this Constitution, if you offer an amendment that will allow Virginia and North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia to keep their slave patrols, which were referred to as state militias. And Patrick Henry said, and I'm quoting, that would be, if you had an administration with a northern president, for example, John Adams, the second president of the United States, they will search that Constitution and see if they have the power of manumission. Manumission is an old word for freeing slaves. And have they not, sir? Have they not power to provide for the general defense and welfare? You'll recall Article 1, Section 8 said that Congress has the power. Back to my little handy-dandy Constitution here. Article 1, Section 8 says, and I quote, Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Okay? So, back to Patrick Henry. And have they not, sir, have they not power to provide for the general defense and welfare May they not think that these call for the abolition of slavery? May they not pronounce all slaves free, and will they not be warranted by that power provided by this Constitution? This is no ambiguous implication or logical deduction. The Constitution speaks to the point. They have the power in clear, unequivocal terms and will clearly and certainly exercise it. This is a local matter, and I see no propriety in subjecting it to Congress. But at that point, it was too late to amend Article 1, Section 8, so they had to amend the entire Constitution. Now, James Madison, when Patrick Henry said this, Madison was in the room. Madison helped write the Constitution, and he was a slaveholder himself and a neighbor of Henry's. And he said in his diary, he said, I was struck with surprise when I heard him express himself alarmed with respect to the emancipation of the slaves. There is no power to warrant it in the Constitution. If there is, I know it not. But Patrick Henry said, in response, in this situation, I see a great deal of the property, in other words, the slaves, of the people of Virginia in jeopardy and their peace, the slaveholders, and tranquility gone. So James Madison changed the first draft of the Second Amendment, which had said the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security for a free country. Right? It was a national militia. And this is what Patrick Henry was objecting to. If you have a national militia, then the North could order the freed slaves to be part of it, or slaves to be part of it and free them. Being the best security of a free country, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. And instead, they changed it to make it that the states could keep their militia, which is the current Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state, not a free country. First draft said free country. Free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that's where the Second Amendment in its current form came from. It is absolutely unambiguous. You can find Patrick Henry's speech before the Virginia Ratifying Convention in June of 1788 in 100 different sources. It's easily found on the internet. If you Google my name and slave patrols, you will find the and Truth Out or Alternate. You will find the article in its original form, and there's a link in that article through to Patrick Henry's name is highlighted, hot linked. It links right to his speech. This is what the Second Amendment was all about. It was about keeping the slave patrols in the South. And, we need to acknowledge the horrors, the original sins of slavery.